Hi guys, welcome back. In this video tutorial I'm going to walk you through simple file I/O using text files in C++. Okay, so the general process for dealing with text files is something like this. There's a 5-step algorithm that we follow, and step 1 is we're going to open a file for input or output. Okay, the second thing we're going to do is we're going to check to see if the file has been opened. Okay, and if it has, then we've performed step 3, which is to perform the read or write operations, depending on whether it's open for reading or writing. Okay. Step 4, once we're finished our read write operations, we close the file. Okay. And step 5, we do if step 2 wasn't successful. If the file failed to open for whatever reason, step 5 is where we display an error message. Okay. So just because we tell the operating system to open a file within our program, it doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen. Okay, the operating system can say no. Okay, so we have to verify before we try to write to a file that it, or read from a file, that it actually was in fact opened. Okay, so if it was, then we perform whatever operation we wanted to do, and then we close it. If the file isn't open, then we display some kind of error message, letting the user know. Okay. All right, so in order to work with files, we're going to use a couple of variables, and these variables are a data type that we get from the ifstream library file. Okay, so we're going to have to use data types that aren't built in. We're going to have to use either the ifstream object, okay, which is for reading from files. It stands for input file stream. Or we're going to use the ofstream object, right, which is a variable we're going to use for writing to files. Right? Ofstream stands for output file stream. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We'll use a combination of, to read and write, we're going to use a combination of the stream insertion and extraction operators and the getLine function. All right, so let's go and get started. Let me create a brand new file here in code blocks. Okay, and we'll put our main function in here. Right, every single C++ program is going to have an int main. Let me save that. I'll just save it to my desktop. We'll call it main.cpp. Okay, and let's start by having a couple pound includes, preprocessor directives here. Okay, we're going to need the ifstream file. That's where we're going to get the ifstream and ofstream objects from. We're going to make variables using those objects to open and close to manipulate the files we're going to use. Okay, I'm going to use iostream to get some information from the keyboard and display it to the user. So I need that for cout and cn. And then I'm also going to show you that we can format output to files just like we can, just like we can when we are outputting format to the screen using cout. Okay, so we're going to need iomanip. All right, and I'm going to need the string object to help me process some text files later. In the example I'm going to show you later, strings aren't built into C++, so we have to do a pound include string. Get access to the string object so we can make string variables. Okay. And then all of our C++ files, we're going to have this line here. Okay. All right. So let's get started with the first example. And the first example is really easy. Okay. All I want to do is I'm going to write a single integer to a text file, and then I'm going to read that integer from the same text file. Okay. So we're going to write and read a single integer to and from a text file. Okay, so what do we need to do? Okay, well, let's do the first part. Let's break this into two pieces. First thing we want to do is we want to write an integer to a text file. Okay, so we're going to need to open a file. To do that, we're going to need to verify that the file has been opened. Then we're going to need to write our integer to the text file and then close it. Okay. So in order to open a file for for writing, we need to use an ofstream object. So let's make an ofstream variable. Okay, and we'll just call it out. Okay, for file out. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to attempt to open that text file. So we're going to use this member function that's part of the ofstream object. Okay, and we need to provide a name for the file that we want to write to. Okay, so let's write to a file named output.txt. Okay, so when you're writing to a file using the ofstream object, what's going to happen now is that assuming that the operating system lets us open it, okay, if this file already exists, then we're going to open it. If output.txt already exists, we're going to open it and overwrite whatever was there. Okay, that's the default behavior. Okay, if output.txt doesn't exist, then opening it will create an empty file named output.txt. Okay, so if it doesn't exist, it'll get created. If it does exist, we're going to overwrite whatever was in there. Okay, so this is the first part of the process, right? We're attempting to open the file. Now we have to verify that it is in fact open. Okay, so let me make little comments here. Open, attempt to open output.txt for writing. Okay, now we're going to have an if statement here that's going to check to make sure that it is open. Okay, if it does open successfully, if the operating system says, okay, no problem, here's a link to the output.txt file, then fout is going to store in its memory location a non-zero value. Okay, so if it's a non-zero value, this is going to evaluate the true. So if the file was opened successfully, then do some stuff. Okay, successfully. Okay. So we're going to have this block in here where we're going to do our writes. Okay. All right. Else, okay, if it doesn't open successfully, then we want to print an error message. Okay. But I think what I'm going to do to save me some typing is I'm going to make a function that does that. So let me just make this simple little function that prints an error message, and we'll call it p-error for print error. Okay, it's a void function, doesn't take any arguments, it's just going to contain a single cout statement, so I don't have to keep writing the same string over and over and over again. Okay, so all this is going to do is it's going to say cout error opening files. Okay, that's all it's going to say. Okay, so now instead of having to write error opening files every single time, I can just do this. Let's write error. Okay. All right. So we're going to write an integer to this file, but let's get an integer from the user. How about we do that? Okay, why don't we do that first? Okay, so cout will prompt the user for an integer. Give me an int to write to the file. Okay, and then we'll read it in using cin, and we'll store it in x. Okay. All right. So now that we have an integer from the user in x, now let's write it to the file. Okay. So all we have to do is use the stream insertion operator to send that integer to the file. So here we go. There it is. Okay, that's the statement we're going to use. So what's going to happen is the cout, we're going to ask the user for an integer. Cin, we're going to get that integer from the keyboard, right, when the user types it in. Then we're going to open up the file, output.txt. If it's open, we're going to write the integer we got from the user that's stored in x to the file. Okay, and then once that's done, we'll close it by using this member function ifOut.close. Okay. All right, so let's test this thing. Okay. So when I run it, give me an int right to the file, and let's give it 42. Okay. All right. So now What happened? Did it right? Well, let's go check. Let's go see if we can find the text file. Why don't I just open it right here in code blocks? Okay. So let's see here. Output.txt, I think that's what we called it. Okay. Oops, I opened the wrong one. This is in a different directory. Let me open the correct one. I want the one that's on my desktop. That's where I saved it. Okay. So there it is. 2 bytes and 42. Okay, so we stored it in there. Why is the file 2 bytes long? Because there is 2 characters stored in here. Okay, each one of these is a byte long. Okay, all right. So there we have it. So let's run this again and try a different value, just to show you that it's going to overwrite what was there before, right? Because it's going to reopen it, and when you open an existing text file, you overwrite whatever was in there previously. So let's do 99 this time. Okay. All right. So output.txt is modified. This is true. Why? Because our program just changed it. Okay. So let's reload it. Okay. So output.txt now contains 99. All right. Overwrote it. Okay. So now we know how to write a single integer to a text file. Let's read from that text file now. Okay, so this is going to write X to the text file. Okay, this performs the write, and this closes the file. Okay, you always want to close a file as soon as you're done working with it. Okay, because there might be other programs that's running on your computer that wants access to that file, right? And as long as you have it open, nobody else can get access to it. So to be a good citizen, you always want to close a file as soon as you have finished working with it. Okay. Okay, so let's write to a file now. Okay. All right. Or excuse me, let's read from it. So what we're going to do is we're going to read the value that's stored inside the text file, and we'll store it into this this y variable here. Okay, so let's read the int from the text file and store it in y. Okay, so now what we have to do is we need to use a different object. Okay, we're going to make an ifstream variable. Okay, ifstream. Okay, and let's give it a different name. We have to have a unique name here. So what this is, what ifstream is, it stands for input file stream. Okay, so we use this object when we want to read from a file, when we want to read in, when we want to do file input. Okay, and I'll just name it fin. I can name it whatever I want, subject to the rules of identifiers. Okay, we're going to follow the same general algorithm. Okay, we're going to attempt to open the file. We're going to verify that it's open. If it is, then we're going to do our read operation and close it. Okay, if it fails to open, we're going to display an error message to the user. So let's open the file. So open. Okay, same member function as the ofstream object has. Okay, and the argument is a string also. Okay, the name of the file. Okay, we're going to write an integer to output.txt and then close it. Then we're going to open output.txt and read that same integer and store it in memory. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so attempt to open output.txt for reading. Okay, so now we have to verify it's open. If fin, if file is open, do stuff. Okay. And what are we going to do? Okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to have, we're going to use the stream insertion operator. Okay, we're going to, or extraction operator, to grab a value, the first value, from text file. Okay, and we're going to store it inside the y variable. Okay, then once we're done with that, we're going to close it. Okay. Okay, if the file doesn't open, then we have to have this else statement down here, and we're going to print an error. Right? I am using my parser function to do that. Okay. So once that's finished, why don't we display the contents of y to prove that it worked? The contents of y. Okay. Oops. Probably should send y to the stream, right? To output. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this and see if it works. Okay, so let's write an integer to the file. This time we'll do 11. Okay, so this is going to write 11 to output.text, and then our program is going to read that same integer from that file and store it in y and then display that to us. Okay, so there we go. Okay, and to prove that it works also, let's look inside our output.text file. There's 11. Okay, so far our program can read and write an integer to a file. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. How about we read and write arrays. Okay, let's read and write values from arrays. From and to arrays. Okay, so go ahead and take a look at this code here. I'll give you a second to take a look at what we have so far, and then I'll replace it with our. I'll get it out of the way, and then we'll do the same thing but with arrays. Okay. All right. So let me get this extra stuff out of the way. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to write and read an array of doubles to and from a text file. Okay. If you don't know what arrays are just yet, don't worry about it. You can refer to this video after we've covered arrays, but I'll cover it here since we're doing file I/O. Okay. All right. So we're going to follow the same general pattern. We're going to attempt to open the file. We're going to verify it is open. Then we're going to attempt to write the contents of an array to the file, and then close the file. Okay. So we're going to be writing to a file to start with. So we need our ofstream object, and I'll call it fout, just because I like that word. Kind of like to think of it as file out, right? Okay, it's kind of like cout, but files. I just made that up. You could have named this thing anything that you wanted. Right? You could call it output or something, right? It doesn't matter. It's just an identifier that you make up that makes sense. Okay, so we'll call it output just for this example to show you that there's nothing special about that identifier. Okay, it's just the name of the variable of the ofstream variable. Okay, just like if you decided to name it integer x or z, doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to need an array of doubles to read from. So let's make one. Double D. I'll just use an initialization list. Again, if you don't know arrays yet, don't worry about it. Just this is kind of a preview to arrays that we'll cover in chapter 7. Okay. So let's make an initialization list here. And 13. Okay. So let's make a size declarator here, a constant size declarator. Constant length equals 6. Okay. So there we go. All right. So I've made an array, and this array stores 6 doubles, 1.1, 1.2, etc. Okay, these are the 6 values that are stored inside this array. All right, so let's go ahead and do the writing. Okay, so output, oops, dot write, oops, dot open, excuse me. And I need a name here, so why don't we just call this this file array dot text. Okay, I'll give it a different file name than just output. Okay. All right, so now we have to verify that it does in fact open. Okay. And then if it does, we're going to write the contents of this array to our text file. Okay. So we need to use a for loop to do this. Iterate through each element. 0 I less than length. I plus plus. Okay. I think I mentioned at the very beginning of the video that we can format the output to a file just like we can to the screen. Right? We can use screen manipulators to arrange how output is going to look inside of a text file, just like we can if it goes to the screen. So why don't I do this as part of my write operation here, okay? Just to show you. Okay, so output, we're going to send to output these values, and let's format them. Let's give them their own fields, 10 spaces each. Let's make them fixed and display 3 decimal places of precision. Okay, and let's put them. Just put a space between them. We won't put them on their own lines inside the file. Okay. All right. And then once we're done with that, let's close the file. Okay. We can't forget that. Oops, this needs to go inside the if. Can't forget, our else here in case it doesn't. We have to let the user know if something went wrong. Right? Okay. Following the same pattern that we did for the single integer, we're going to do this for an array. Okay. So let's go ahead and test this thing. Let's run it. Okay. It doesn't show anything on the screen, so we didn't print anything out on the screen. But let's open up, what's the name of the file? What do we call it? We call it array.txt. So let's go open that. Okay, it's on my desktop. Array.txt. Okay, so there we go. There's all the values inside the text file that I just wrote. 1.100, 2.200, 3.300, 5.500, etc. Okay. Now you're probably wondering, well, why isn't it just 1.1, 2.2, 3.3? Right? That's what's stored in the array. Well, because I formatted it. Right? I formatted it to show 3 decimal places of precision. Okay? So that's why we have the extra 3 decimal places here. Okay, why aren't they right next to each other? Well, I set the width to 10 characters. Each field has its own 10 characters. Okay, so let me go here and change this. Let me take the formatting out. Okay, I'll take the formatting out. Actually, I don't need to take the formatting out. I'll leave it in there. Okay, what I want to do is I want to now this writes to the array, or to the file, write the array to the file. Now let's read the array from the file. Okay, I'll create a second array here to help us out. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to read all those values from the array, from the file, and we're going to store them into this new array. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, we're going to have to use an ifstream object, and we'll call this one input. Okay, so we have this ifstream variable named input. Okay, now let's attempt to open it. Okay, array.text, because that's where our data is stored. We have to make sure that it actually did open. Oops. Okay. Okay, and if it does, then let's do our reading. Okay, we'll do a for loop here, because we know we're going to read exactly 6 values, because that's what's stored in there. Length, oops. less than length, 5++. Okay. Input, what did we call it? E, right? Okay. So, this is going to open up the text file. If it's open, we're going to loop through and we're going to read from the file 6 times, once for each value that's stored in there, and we're going to store each one of those values into each individual element of this array. Okay. Once that's done, we'll close the file. Okay. Let's have our error message here. All right. If it fails to open, then we're going to write an error message. We're going to skip this whole part. Okay. But if it successfully opens, we're going to read all the values stored in the text file into our E array. Then we're going to close the file. Now let's display the contents. Let's display the contents of our E array. Right. When we first defined it, E up here, just got garbage values in there. There's nothing in there. But what we're going to do is we're going to read all the values that we wrote to the text file, and we're going to store them into our E array. So let's display the E array after we're done with the read operations. Okay. Cout EI, and I'll put a space in between so that way all the numbers don't run together. We'll tack on an end line here. Okay, so let's test this. Okay, compile and run. All right. So these are all the values that are now stored in our E array. Okay, they came from the D array. We wrote it to the array.txt file. Okay, then we read them all in from the array.txt file, and we stored them in the E array. Okay. All right. And here are all the values inside inside array.txt. Okay. So you might be wondering, well, if these values are stored in the array or in the array.txt file as 1.100, 2.200, then why, when we oops, go back to main.cpp. Why, when we run this thing, do we only see 1.1, 2.2, 3.3, 5.5, etc.? Because these aren't formatted, this output isn't formatted to be displayed the same way that we stored it in the text file. Okay, the values themselves are stored in memory like this. Okay, remember when we use the stream manipulators, we are changing the appearance of the values, not the values themselves. Okay, and that works in reverse too, right? It doesn't need to store 1.100, okay, because that 00 after in the decimal places doesn't mean anything. 13.130, right, doesn't change the fact that it's still 13.13. It's the same number, right? So why store that extra 0? Okay. All right, so that covers reading and writing from a text file to a text file. Using an integer, we saw that. Using arrays. Now what I want to show you, the last thing I want to show you is working with bigger text files. Okay, I want to show you how we can display the contents of a text file. Okay, and then once I've done that, I'll show you how we can copy the contents of one text file to another. Okay, so let's do that. So let me delete this stuff and get it out of the way. All right, so we're going to display the contents of a text file. Okay, how are we going to do this? All right, well, we're going to open a file for reading. So we're going to need the ofstream, or excuse me, the ifstream object, input file stream object, and we'll just call it input file. Okay, again, I can call it whatever I want. Right? So this is kind of like the data type. Right? ifstream is the ifstream object is the data type for my variable, which has an identifier that I've called input file. Okay, so let's open it. Okay, and to keep it simple, I'll just I'll just display to the screen, I'll just display the contents of this very source file. Okay, main.cpp. Right? I'll use the source file itself for testing. All right. Input file dot open. Okay. So we're going to attempt to open it. We're going to verify if the file is open. Okay, if it is, we're going to do whatever's in this block. If it's not, we're going to print our error message. Okay. So if it does open, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to use a temporary holding location in memory to hold each line of the text file. So basically what's going to happen, basically the algorithm is going to be, open the file, make sure it's open, attempt to read the first line of text in the file. If that's successful, display it to the screen, okay, and then read the next line of text. Okay, then repeat that over and over and over again until we get to the very end of the file. And when we get to the end, we try to read another line, well, that's going to fail. It's not going to be successful. So at that point, we're going to stop trying to read and write. Okay, so we're going to be using a loop here. Okay, but I'm going to need a temporary storage location, a temporary memory location to hold each line of text as I read it. So that's where the string object comes in. Okay. So I'll make a variable that is a string object, and I'll name it input. Okay. And we're going to use our friend that we saw earlier for reading input from the keyboard, multiple words with spaces, right, as opposed to just like seeing in the stream extraction operator, we're going to use getLine. But this time, instead of using cin as the first argument, right, instead of grabbing input from the keyboard, we're going to get it from our input file. Okay, we're changing our source of data. Okay, and we're going to store it in the input variable. Okay. All right, so that's attempting to read the first line. Okay. Attempt to read first line of file. Okay, if the file is empty, this is going to fail, and we're not going to display anything. But if it succeeds, that means that there's at least one line of characters in here. Okay, so then we can have this while loop that we're going to use to repeat this process over and over and over again until we reach the end of the file. Okay, so while input file. Okay, so if this getLine operation is successful, this statement is successful, then input file here is going to contain a non-zero value. Okay, so we can test for that. Okay, and if it contains a non-zero value, then this will be true, and we'll enter this while loop. Okay, now if we're in here, that means that we successfully read at least one line of text. So let's display it to the screen. Okay, and then let's move to the next line. Okay, so this is going to display the contents of input that we've read from the text file, and then it's going to move us to the next line. Okay, so once we've done that, we have to get the next line of the text file. Let's try. So let's have another getLine statement in here. Oops, input file, input. Okay. So this is going to attempt to get another line of text from the file. If it's successful, input file will contain a non-zero value, right, which will cause this test expression to evaluate the true, which will enable us to do another iteration. And that iteration consists of printing what we read and getting the next line over and over and over again. Okay. Okay. So while we have successfully read a line of text, okay, we're going to display that line and get the next line. Okay. All right. So that's going to go through, this while loop is going to go through line by line, extract the line from the file, store it inside input, right? Display it, get the next line, store it in input, display it, etc., etc., etc. Okay. So once that's done, once we've gone through the entire text file, this while loop, this will evaluate to false, and we'll be done doing that, and we'll be finished. So let's close the file. Alright, so let's test this. Okay, when I run this, I should see displayed as output the contents of this file. Okay, so there we go. Okay, there's the contents of my main.cpp file. I opened it and I went line by line printing it out, extracting a line, storing it into my input string variable, displaying it, extracting the next line, storing it into the input string variable, displaying it, etc., 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 until I got to the very end when there were no more lines to read. Then I close the file and I'm done. Okay, it's really that simple. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you, and we'll be finished, is how I can copy the contents of one file to another. Okay, so basically the way this is going to work is we're going to open the source file. That's the file I'm going to copy its contents from, and I'm going to open a target file where I want to write those contents to. I'm going to verify they're both open. I'm going to have a loop similar to what we just saw, except for instead of sending the lines to output, right, to display, I'm going to send them to my target text file. Okay, and then once that's done, I'll close both of them, and we'll be finished with our copy. Okay, so let me clean this up. Let me get this out of the way. Okay, so let me make a note here of what I'm going to do. Copy contents of one text file to another.